Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. We've got a few things to kind of meander around today, Bob. And a lot of talk around Boris's plan, his crime bill and his crime plan that he's going to roll out later on today, in which he's going to try and get to grips with the people's relationship with the police, really. What are you making of that?
I think it's a good move. For goodness sake, crime is increasing in London, particularly, Mike. We've got to get as much a grip of it as we can. Decent, honest people are frightened, and therefore we've got to protect them, and that's the purpose of the police.
Yes. Where do you think the police have been getting it wrong lately? Because it seems to me that the ordinary policeman and woman on the street is actually doing the best job that they can do, but they're not being led particularly well.
Well, to be honest, I speak to a heck of a lot of policemen. Every day I speak to policemen. I think they're doing it extremely well. I just wish they'd get a better break from the press. I mean, for example, in riots, it's just the police that have done something wrong. There's nothing, it's not the rioters that are trying to batter them to hell or, attack, property. And the police are duty bound to try and protect them. And they get a really bad press sometimes. Not from you, I have to say, and not from a lot of people, but some elements of the media are immediately on the side of the rioters, and I'm not.
No, I get that, and I know that you're a great defender of the press, Colonel Bob, but also at the same time, you're quite critical of large parts of it, aren't you?
Well, I'm critical of parts of it that don't give a fair picture. I mean, some of the stories, when I was in the military, one bad story was magnified out of all proportion to all the good stories. And that works exactly the same for the police. The police are trying to do their very best. They are honourable, decent people trying to protect other people. And when they are on the streets, they are unfairly attacked and ridiculed sometimes.
Yes. And so this idea, which is on the front page of the Mail today, Priti Patel's written a piece saying she's going to make yobs clean the streets. It's a bit of a kind of back to basics, isn't it?
So I hope people get that. I mean, if I'm outside my house, I just watch sometimes cars just throw rubbish out of the street on the streets. What are people thinking? Someone's got to pick that up. Well, I don't think of anyone better to pick it up than someone that's done wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And officers will also be given more powers to seize knives under a relaxation of restrictions on their stop and search powers as well. So there'll be more stop and search. Again, a lot of people are against that. What do you say to them?
Well, I say, for goodness sake, when you've had your child knifed or had someone in your family, I bet your attitude would change. Frankly, I haven't, but I understand the situation. I mean, imagine yourself living in South London. You're from an ethnic minority group, and you're a decent mum trying to bring up her boys, and those boys are coerced into joining gangs. They're frightened. The mum's frightened that when they go out, they might be actually forced to do things they don't want to do, or indeed assaulted and sometimes killed.
I mean, you've been involved, Bob, in the military in doing kind of police work in a way. I mean, when you were in Bosnia, quite a lot of what you were doing was more about keeping the peace than it was about, fighting anyone. Do you think there's anything that you can offer to the police and also to Boris Johnson as far as what measures might make London and other cities in this country safer for people?
The most important thing a politician can do, Mike, is to support the police and not run them down. And several members of Parliament actually run down the police. I think they are a disgrace. They know what they're talking about often, and they haven't actually been to see the police and talk to them. So that's the most important thing I can do, is continue to go out and say the police are good, not bad. There will be the occasional mistake they made, but it will normally be a mistake of good intention, and actually they're human. And there must be, I mean, I just speak to police officers who actually have to stand there and be hit. And if they actually raise something, fist back, it's them that's in the wrong, for goodness sake.
Yes, it does seem as though it's all been tipped onto its head, does it not? And also during the whole kind of period of the various lockdowns that we've had, they have been asked to do some ludicrous things, like going and knocking on people's doors and asking them if they've got more than 6 people in the house.
Yeah, well, I haven't heard. Well, I've heard of that, but I haven't seen much of it. I would think police officers, senior police officers, should try and avoid doing that sort of thing. But at the same time, the police force is there to maintain the law. If we have laws that are a bit daft, the police still have to maintain them. I feel sorry for them. They're in a cleft stick then.
Mm. So do you think this will actually help them then, if it does give individual powers to individual police officers to do more, actually face to face on the streets, to stop violence and to stop crime? Because there is a sense in some parts of this country that there is not enough. There's not enough police to be seen, and two, that people who are committing these crimes, which are sometimes low level crimes, think they're just going to get away with it because they do.
Well, yeah, that's the point. I want less of them to get away with it. And I want more support for the police from everyone, not just politicians, but also general public. The police are there for everyone's protection. They're the only people that actually put themselves in danger often. That's not exclusively. There's some very brave women and men who actually will go immediately to support the police. But in my experience, I've seen too much of people actually not supporting the police, not only in the words they say, but also on the street. If there's an incident, say, I mean, it is the duty of every one of us to go and help the police when they're actually overwhelmed. It's the duty of all of us. The police don't want that to happen. I know they often say we don't want to get you involved, but I personally think we all ought to take responsibility for policing, not just those people in uniform.
Mm. And you and I, Bob, haven't spoken on Talk Radio for quite a long time. What have you made of the last year and how we've all coped with it and how you've coped with it and where we are now? Because like I was saying, it's kind of, we feel as if we're slightly in limbo at the moment. We're not quite out of it. We're not quite in it. You know, what are you thinking about all that?
Well, you know, Mike, I'm a fan of yours. I don't want you to get too carried away with that while you drink your gin. But I think radio stations have been absolutely superb, actually, during the lockdown. They have been a lifeblood. I mean, and people, what I particularly like about radio is talking about problems and allowing the problem to actually be aired and giving people time. People that disagree with me on your show, maybe, you give them time to speak. I'm not just thinking of Talk Radio, I'm talking of other radio stations too. And when someone like you, a presenter, actually is fair, and I want fairness in the presenters. I don't want you necessarily to agree with me. Well, I would like you to agree with me, but I mean, the fact of the matter is, your job is to actually tease out the arguments, and that's the great thing about radio. Radio actually gives time. Television doesn't, and the newspapers is just a one-way story. But when you have a discussion program like yours, you can get other views too. When people ring in, get some absolute crazies ringing in. But you've got to be polite and decent and allow them to have their say up to a point. And then you've got some people you may fundamentally disagree with, but still you give them the airtime to say it. And that's what our democracy and our freedoms are all about, to allow the crazies to have their say. But hopefully the majority of people will realise they're nuts.
Yes. Well, we do occasionally get the Labour Party on from time to time. I didn't mean to obviously make that connection. But speaking of speaking of our freedoms, Bob, I mean, you know, we've lost quite a few. We've got various different views on how we should be getting them back. Whether there should be things like vaccine passports, whether you should have to reveal what your medical details are before you can walk into a nightclub. What's your view of all of that?
I don't like it, to be honest. It's very much against my personal philosophy. I don't think it's conservative philosophy either. But, you know, one thing about the Conservative Party and government, you've got to sometimes be pragmatic. Now, I don't know whether having a COVID passport as such, i.e. proving you've had two jabs, will actually decrease the incidence of people dying, which is what we're talking about. I don't know that. I hope that's not the case. I hope we don't have to have vaccine passports. I find it pretty envious that my kids can't go abroad at the moment because they haven't had. My wife can go abroad, she has, to stay with her sister, but the kids are stuck with me. I'm stuck with 2 kids and a dog because my wife's gone, but I don't mind that. I quite like it. But the fact of the matter is, I don't like these passports at all. But I do accept that I am not the person, and neither are you. Neither of us are the person that has real responsibility for making that decision. And it really does come down to the Prime Minister. And if he gets it wrong, my goodness, the media will turn on him fast. So it's a real responsibility to try and get this right. I don't like vaccine passports. I don't want them. But if the Prime Minister tells me to my face, and he has on a couple of times during the pandemic, told me his view, and I've actually said it on the radio. I've spoken to the Prime Minister about this. He said this. I hope I wasn't breaking confidence when I did that. But the Prime Minister is someone that doesn't like COVID passports either. I'm sure of that. I'm quite sure that the Prime Minister doesn't like in any way any restriction on privileges. He doesn't. But he feels in his position that he has no choice to do it because his primary responsibility is the safety of the country. Now, you may disagree that actually he's made that choice, the wrong choice, but it weighs very heavily on Boris Johnson. He actually takes anyone that's Prime Minister suddenly takes on the responsibility for looking after you, me, and everyone listening to this program. And that responsibility is something that neither you nor I have.
That's true. I have other responsibilities, though. Stay with us, Bob, if you will, because I've just got a few more things to ask you about. Very, very interesting what you've been saying. Colonel Bob Stewart with me. He's the Conservative MP for Beckenham. If you've got a question for him, by all means, let us know, and we will put it to him. Right now, they're here on Talk Radio TV. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back with Colonel Bob Stewart. I want to ask him about the migrant crisis, and I'm going to ask him about Sage as well. This is Talk Radio.
Online.
The Prime Minister has. I wonder, though, sometimes if he's listening to the wrong people, because if you and I say that we don't know what it's like to have that responsibility and we're not qualified to make those judgments, then I don't think people like Neil Ferguson from Sage is qualified either. He's a behavioural psychologist, a man who seems to get all predictions that he makes completely and utterly wrong, and yet he's still a government advisor. And I worry that people like that, who are telling the Prime Minister things that may affect his judgment, are having a bit too much power.
Yeah, my understanding that Sage is quite a lot of people, Mike. It's not just Ferguson.
Oh, it is, yeah.
There's other, yeah. So, I mean, presumably, the Prime Minister is listening to them. They come to a collective judgment and a recommendation. And it's up to the Prime Minister to accept it, yes. But I mean, I would very much hope that actually there's not just, this committee is quite broad. I think it's over 20. I'm not quite sure, but I think it's over 20 people.
It is about 28, I think.
They've got to decide on what they recommend. Now, it's up to the Prime Minister to decide it. He will have to put the politics into it. For example, there are a heck of a lot of people in my constituency who are telling me it's barking mad to take restrictions off. There's quite a few people in my constituency arguing we should never have had restrictions in the first place. And my view is, frankly, I don't want restrictions. I want restrictions off, but equally that's got to be tempered against the idea that we might actually be running a considerable risk by so doing. And so I'm quite sure there's the same sort of pressures that come on the Prime Minister, despite what Sage has to say, and he will be getting advice from other people. For example, members of the Cabinet, the
Yes,
Health Secretary.
Yes, I think that's right, and it would appear that having lost Matt Hancock, life is going to return to normal quicker than it would have done if we had not. Let me just ask you finally, Bob, about the migrant crisis, because with your military experience, I mean, obviously you'll know a bit about protecting borders and protecting people from being able to just sort of walk into countries, as it were. But it appears that we are in a situation now where nobody can stop this kind of invasion by people who feel like they want to come here, and we can't stop them.
Well, I would like all these boats to be turned round. That's in principle. In practice, it's quite difficult when you find a boatload with children and other vulnerable people in the boat. I mean, you're asking Coast Guards and Royal Navy personnel to be really quite vicious, and they're not like that, Mike. They're like you and I. I mean, well, I think they're like you and I. In far as I hope we have some sympathy. The laws of the sea also demand that if they're in our waters, we take responsibility for them. We don't like them. People have criticised Priti Patel for sending money to France to patrol the beaches, for example.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to know what else she can do. She has to obey the law. And the law, it's not EU law, it's the law of the sea and international law, which we've endorsed at the United Nations. Now, I know pretty well, to use double word. Pretty actually would like this matter resolved. It's not.
Well, she's not the only one.
She doesn't, and she's
She's not the only one that wants it resolved. I think most people in this country want it resolved.
She's the one with responsibility who gets the blame, Mike. And every time she says, right, well, I'm quite sure her default position is don't let the boats come in, turn them back, send them back. And then she will get advice from the legal people that support her, say, you are not allowed to do that, Secretary of State. You can't do it. You can't stand up in Parliament and make such a comment, because actually you're putting people's lives in danger. I get that. You get that. It is a no-win situation sometimes on this. I mean, after all, Theresa May was Home Office Minister, yonks and yonks. Every single year she'd stand up and say she was going to get a grip of this immigration thing, people coming. And every single year she failed. It's not through lack of trying, but for some reason, there are always obstacles that may not even be apparent to me and you, but are there nonetheless, and she can't do it.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the problems, Bob, is that this is no longer a simple case of people seeking asylum in a country because they need to be safe from somebody following them and chasing them and trying to kill them. And it's not like that anymore. Now it's a business. Now it's a multi-million-pound criminal enterprise.
Delegate went across there. My wife visited. She just a personal visit. She went there, and she said something like 95% of the people there were economic migrants.
Yeah, they are.
And so the 5% that were not refugees, they should have sought refugee status in a country before they got to the UK. So, we know the arguments. We know the arguments on that. And equally, the children that are children that are actually quite children. Some of them, you might doubt how old they actually are. But fundamentally, they have often been sent on this huge journey for children, and we're talking up to 18, 19, by their families, because actually they thought the risk was worth it. Well, frankly, I've got 2 points on that. One, the family shouldn't have done it. And my second point is they must be pretty flipping desperate to send a young adult all that way. So, although I'm a so-called right-wing Tory, someone that would like the matter resolved by, send them back, do that sort of thing, we can't do it easily. If we could fix it, we would have done so before. So it remains an ongoing problem, and which fundamentally I will give the Home Secretary as much support as I can.